Welcome all of you to this lecture session on hypothesis testing. In this lecture session, we will be discussing on what we understand by hypothesis, what are the different type of hypotheses like null hypothesis, alternative hypothesis, how to formulate a hypothesis, and what are the different steps in hypothesis testing. And at the end, we'll discuss on the test, that is t-test, and which is the simple test which is normally being applied for the small sample and when the population standard deviation is unknown. So hypothesis testing, we'll discuss in this session hypothesis testing. Basically the objective of the hypothesis testing is to either reject or retain a null hypothesis. And hypothesis testing is a process of either rejecting or retaining a claim or belief or association related to a situational context like product, maybe service, maybe process, etc. The hypothesis test consists of two complementary statements, like one talking about null hypothesis, one talking about alternative hypothesis. And of the two hypotheses, only one of them is true. So the H null hypothesis is denoted as H naught, which claims or refers to the statement that there is no relationship or no difference between different groups, and the complement of that is represented as H1, that is alternative hypothesis. The different steps in hypothesis testing, like first you formulate the hypothesis in your own words, then based on the hypothesis you define, based on the claim you define the null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. Then initially we believe that null hypothesis is true, so null and alternative hypothesis are defined using a population parameter. Then third step, you identify an appropriate test statistics which will be used for testing the validity of the null hypothesis. Then the test statistics will enable us to calculate the evidence in support of the null hypothesis. Then you will think about whether the information about the population standard deviation is known or is not known. If the population standard deviation is known and the size of the sample is more than 30, which is being considered as a large sample, so we can apply the JET. If the population standard deviation is unknown, we can use the sample standard deviation, and here we can apply the t-test. So when using the t-distribution, you must assume the population you are sampling must follow a normal distribution. Then fourth step, you define the criteria for rejection and retention of null hypothesis, which is being denoted as word alpha. The significance level may be 1%, maybe 5%, maybe 10%. So the significance value alpha is a type 1 error. So there are two types of error which can come out when we go for hypothesis testing, type 1 error and type 2 error. Then step 5, you calculate the p-value, which is nothing but the conditional probability of observing the test statistics value when the null hypothesis is true. And in simple term, p-value is evidence in support of the null hypothesis. Then sixth step, you take the decision to reject or to retain the null hypothesis based on the p-value and the significance value alpha. So this is how the hypothesis description can be gone for, how we can formulate null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis, and mu represents the population mean. So here we can have two tail, we can have one tail, and again it can be right tail if it is alternative is greater than and less than, that is left tail. So three type of hypothesis: left tail test, right tail test, and two tail test. This is an example of left tail test. This is an example of right tail test. And this is an example of two tail test. and these are the different critical value of z for right tail, for left tail, and for two tail. For two tail at 5% and 1%, for left tail at 1% and 5%, and for right tail at 5% and 1%. So hypothesis test for the mean, we broadly categorize into two. When the standard deviation is known, we go for Z test, and the standard deviation is unknown, we go for the T test. So in this session we'll discuss about the T test. So hypothesis test for population mean, that is under unknown population variation. When the size of the sample is less than 30 and when the population standard deviation is unknown, then we can apply the T test. So we'll go for hypothesis test for population mean under unknown population variance. In many cases the population variance, that thus the standard deviation, will not be known. In such cases we have to estimate the variance using the sample itself, and S will be the standard deviation from the sample of the size n. There are different type of T test what we can have. One sample T test, dependent sample T test, independent sample T test. In this example we'll go for the one sample T test, which will compare the mean of a sample to a predefined value. One sample T test is used to compare a sample mean to a specific value, that is population parameter. The test statistics for the T test is x bar, that is sample mean, minus mu, that is population mean, divided S, that is sample standard deviation, divided by n, sample size root over. So the test statistics follow a T distribution with n minus 1 degree of freedom. Here 1 degree of freedom is lost since the standard deviation is estimated from the sample, and this is what the formula. T statistics is equal to x bar sample mean minus mu population mean divided S sample standard deviation by n root over. N is the sample size. This is an example of a two-tail test where the standard deviation is unknown. So here we have the sample mean, we have the population mean, we have the sample standard deviation, and it is asking to test the appropriate hypothesis that alpha is equal to 0.05. The claim is telling 168 per day, that is what the population mean. The sample size is 25, that is a small sample, n is equal to 25. So in order to go for the solution, we formulate the null hypothesis. H naught mu is equal to 161 is equal to 168. Mu naught 168 is a two-tail. Level of significance alpha is equal to 0.05. Here we calculate the degree of freedom, that is sample size minus 1, 25 minus 1, 24. Standard deviation is unknown, so we'll go for the T statistics. So this is the formula, x bar minus mu by S by n root over. S is the sample standard deviation. X bar is the sample mean, that is 172.50, minus mu population mean, that is 168, by 15.40 sample standard deviation by 25 root over, which comes to the figure of 1.46. So here what you have to do, you have to go for the T table. In the T table you have to find out for 24, degree of freedom is 25 minus 1, for 24 at alpha 0.05, for 2 tail what is the value of the T. So from the T table the value will be 2.064. So here we get the calculated value of T as per 1.46. So calculated T value is less than the critical value of T. So we accept the null hypothesis and conclude The average expenditure on data pack is rupees 168. So this is the T table, what you can find it out, the value, how you can find the value from the T table. This is another example where it is talking about the population mean 16.8, sample size is 25, and sample mean is 19.5, and sample standard deviation is 6.6. So this is about the calculation, x bar minus mu by s by n root over, so we get 2.40, and the critical t value of two-tailed test when alpha is equal to 0 is 2.064, so the calculated value is less than, so we accept the null hypothesis. So this is the way how we calculate. N is equal to 25, sample standard deviation s is equal to 6.6, we formulate the null hypothesis, mu is equal to 16.8, mu not equal to 16.8, and we define. This is the way how the t value is calculated and is compared with the table.